Chapter 14, Breathing and Exchange of Gases. As you have read earlier, oxygen is utilized by the organism to indirectly break down simple molecules like glucose, amino acid, fatty acid, etc. to derive energy to perform various activities. Carbon dioxide, which is harmful, is also released during the above catabolic reaction. It is therefore evident that oxygen has to be continuously provided to the cells and carbon dioxide produced by the cells have to be released out. This process of exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with carbon dioxide produced by the cell is called breathing, commonly known as respiration. Place your hand on your chest. You can feel the chest moving up and down. You know that it is due to the breathing. How do we breathe? The respiratory organs and the mechanism of breathing rares are described in the following section of this chapter. Now first, respiratory organs. Mechanism of breathing vary among different groups of animals in depending mainly on their habitats and levels of organization. Lower invertebrates like sponges, coelenterate, flatworms, etc. exchange oxygen with CO2 by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Earthworms use their moist cuticle and insects have a network of tubes, tracheal tubes, to transport atmospheric air within the body. A special vascularized structure called gills, branchial respiration, are used by the most of the aquatic arthropods and mollusks, whereas vascularized bag-like called lungs, pulmonary respiration, are used by the terrestrial forms for the exchange of gases. Among vertebrates, fishes use gills, whereas amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals respire through lungs. Amphibians like frog can respire through their moist skin, cutaneous respiration also. Human respiratory system. We have a pair of external nostrils opening out above the upper lips. It leads to the nasal chamber through the nasal passage. The nasal chamber opens into the pharynx and the portion which is common passage for food and air. The pharynx opens through the larynx region into the trachea. Larynx is a cartilaginous box which helps in sound production and hence called the sound box. During swelling, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of food into the larynx. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity which divides at the level of fifth thoracic vertebra into a right and left primary bronchi. Each bronchi undergoes repeated division to form the secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles, ending up in very thin terminal bronchioles. The trachea, primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchia and in the initial bronchioles are supported by the incomplete cartilaginous ring. Each terminal bronchioles give rise to a number of very thin, irregular wall and vascularized bag-like structures called alveoli. The branching network of bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli comprise the lungs. We have two lungs which are covered by a double layer pleura with pleural fluid between them. It reduces friction on the lung surface. The outer pleural membrane is in close contact with thoracic lining, whereas the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface. The part starting with the external nostril up to the terminal bronchioles constitute the conducting part, whereas the alveoli and their ducts from the respiratory or exchanging part of the respiratory system. The conducting part transports the atmospheric air to the alveoli, clears it from foreign particles, humidify and also brings the air to the body temperature. Exchange part is the site of actual diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood and atmospheric air. The lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber, which is anatomically an airtight chamber. The thoracic chamber is formed dorsally by the ventral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the ribs, and on the lower side by dome-shaped diaphragm. The anatomical setup of the lungs in thorax is such that any change in the volume of the thoracic cavity will be reflected in the lungs pulmonary cavity. Such an arrangement is essential for breathing as we cannot directly alter the pulmonary volume. Respiration involves the following steps: breathing or pulmonary ventilation, by which atmospheric air is drawn in and carbon dioxide rich alveolar air is released out. Diffusion of gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide across alveolar membrane. Transport of gas by the blood, diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between bloods and tissues. Utilization of oxygen by the cells for the catabolic reaction and resultant release of carbon dioxide. Mechanism of breathing. Breathing involves two-stage respiration, during which atmospheric air is drawn in, and expiration, by which the alveolar air is released out. The movement of the air into and out of the lungs is carried out by creating a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmosphere. Inspiration can occur if the pressure within the lungs is less than the atmospheric pressure, that is, there is a negative pressure in the lungs with respect to the atmospheric pressure. Similarly, expiration takes place when the intrapulmonary pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. The diaphragm and a specialized set of muscles, external and internal intercostal between the ribs, help in generation of such gradients. Inspiration is initiated by the contraction of diaphragm, which increase the volume of the thoracic chamber in the anteroposterior axis. The contraction of the external intercostal muscles lift up the ribs and the sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. The overall increase in thoracic volume causes a similar increase in pulmonary volume, and increase in pulmonary volume decrease the intrapulmonary pressure to less than the atmospheric pressure, which forces the air from outside to move into the lungs, that is inspiration. Relaxation of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles returns the diaphragm and sternum to their normal position and reduce the thoracic volume and thereby the pulmonary volume. This leads to an increase in intrapulmonary pressure to slightly above the atmospheric pressure, causing the expulsion of air from the lungs, that is expiration. We have the ability to increase the strength of the inspiration and expiration with the help of additional muscles in the abdomen. On an average, a healthy human breathes 12 to 16 times per minute. The volume of air involved in the breathing movements can be estimated by using a spirometer, which helps in clinical assessment of pulmonary functions. Respiratory volumes and capacities. First, tidal volume. Volumes of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration, it is approx 500 ml, that is, a healthy man can inspire or expire approximately 6000 to 8000 ml of an air per minute. Inspiratory reserve volume. Additional volume of air a person can inspire by forcible inspiration. This averages 2500 ml to 3000 ml. Expiratory reserve volume. Additional volume of an air a person can expire by a forcible expiration. This averages 1000 ml to 1100 ml. Now, residual volume. Volume of air remaining in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. This averages 1100 ml to 1200 ml. By adding up a few respiratory volumes described above, one can derive various pulmonary capacities which can be used in clinical diagnosis. Inspiratory capacities. Total volume of air a person can inspire after a normal expiration. This includes tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume. Expiratory capacity. Total volume of air a person can expire after a normal expiration. This includes tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume. Functional residual capacities. Volume of air that will remain in the lungs after a normal expiration. This includes ERV plus RV. Vital capacity. The maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after a forced expiration. This includes ERV, TB and IRV, or the maximum volume of air person can breathe out after a forced inspiration. Total lungs capacity. Total volume of air accommodated in the lungs at the end of a forced inspiration. This includes RV, ERV, TB and IRV, or vital capacity plus residual volume. Exchange of gases. Alveoli are the primary site of exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between the blood and tissue. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusion, mainly based on the pressure or concentration gradient. Solubility of the gas as well as the thickness of the membranes involved in the diffusion are also some important factors that can affect the rate of the diffusion. Pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure and is represented as partial pressure of oxygen for oxygen and PCO2 for the carbon dioxide. Partial pressure of these gases in the atmospheric air and the two sides of the diffusions are given in the table 14.1. You can see, and in figure 14.3. The data given out clearly indicates concentration gradient for oxygen from alveoli to blood and blood to tissue similarly. Here is the data. Now, a gradient is a pressure for carbon dioxide in the opposite direction, that is from tissue to blood and blood to alveoli, as the solubility of carbon dioxide is 20 to 25 times higher than that of oxygen, but the amount of carbon dioxide that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher compared to that of oxygen. The diffusion membrane is made up of three major layers, namely the thin squamous epithelium of alveoli, endothelium of alveolar capillaries, and the basement substance, composed of thin basement membrane supporting the squamous epithelium and basement membrane surrounding the single layer of endothelial cells of capillaries. In between them, okay. However, its total thickness is much less than a millimeter. Therefore, all the factors in our body are favorable for diffusion of oxygen from alveoli to tissue and that of carbon dioxide from tissue to alveoli. Now, transport of gases. Blood is the medium of transport for oxygen and carbon dioxide. About 97% of oxygen is transported by RBC in the blood, and remaining 3% of the oxygen is carried out in dissolved state through the plasma. Nearly 20 to 25% of the carbon dioxide is transported by RBC, whereas 70% of it is carried out as bicarbonate. About 7% carbon dioxide is carried in dissolved state through plasma. Transport of oxygen. Now, hemoglobin is a red colored iron containing pigment present in the RBC. Oxygen can bind with the hemoglobin in a reversible manner to form oxyhemoglobin. Each hemoglobin molecules can carry a maximum of 4 molecules of the oxygen. Binding of oxygen with the hemoglobin is primarily related to partial pressure of oxygen. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion concentration, and temperatures are the other factors which can interfere with this binding. A sigmoid curve is obtained when percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen is plotted against the partial pressure of oxygen. This curve is called the oxygen dissociation curve and is highly useful in studying effect of factors like partial pressure of carbon dioxide, H plus concentration, etc. on binding of oxygen with the hemoglobin. In the alveoli, where there is high partial pressure of oxygen, low partial pressure of carbon dioxide, lesser H plus concentration, and lower temperature, the factors are all favorable for the formation of oxyhemoglobin, whereas in tissue, where low partial pressure of oxygen, high partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and high H plus concentration and higher temperature exist, the conditions are favorable for dissociation of oxygen from the oxyhemoglobin. This clearly indicates that oxygen gets bound to hemoglobin in the lung surface and gets dissociated at the tissue. Every 100 ml of oxygenated blood can deliver about 5 ml of oxygen to the tissue under normal physiological condition. Temperature of transport of carbon dioxide. Okay. Carbon dioxide is carried by hemoglobin as carboaminohemoglobin, about 20 to 25%. This binding is related to partial pressure of carbon dioxide. Partial pressure of oxygen is a major factor which could affect this binding. When partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high and partial pressure of oxygen is low, as in the tissue, more binding of carbon dioxide occurs, whereas when the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low and partial pressure of oxygen is high, as in the alveoli, dissociation of carbon dioxide from the carboaminohemoglobin takes place, that is CO2, which is bound to the hemoglobin from the tissue, is delivered at the alveoli. RBC contains a very high concentration of enzyme, carbonic anhydrase, and minute quantities of the same is present in the plasma too. This enzyme facilitates the following reaction in the both direction. As you can see the reaction. At the tissue site, where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is high due to catabolism, carbon dioxide diffuses into blood, RBC and plasma and forms HCO3 and H+. At the alveolar site, where partial pressure of carbon dioxide is low, the reaction proceeds in the opposite direction, leading to the formation of carbon dioxide and H2O. Thus, CO2 trapped as bicarbonate at the tissue level and transported to the alveoli is released out as carbon dioxide. Every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood delivers approximately 4 ml of carbon dioxide to the alveoli. Regulation of respiration. Human beings have a significant ability to maintain and moderate the respiratory rhythm to suit the demands of the body tissue. This is done by the neural system, a specialized center present in the medulla region of the brain called respiratory rhythm center is primarily responsible for this regulation. Another center present in the pons region of the brain called pneumotoxic center can moderate the function of the respiratory rhythm center. Neural signal from the center can reduce the duration of the inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. A chemosensitive area is situated adjacent to the rhythm center, which is highly sensitive to carbon dioxide and hydrogen ions. Increase in this substance can activate this center, which in turn can signal the rhythm center to make necessary adjustment in the respiratory process, by which this substance can be eliminated. Receptors associated with aortic arc and carotid artery also can recognize changes in carbon dioxide and H plus concentration and send necessary signal to the rhythm center for remedical actions. The role of oxygen in the regulation of respiratory rhythm is quite insignificant. Disorders of the respiratory system. Asthma is a difficulty in breathing causing wheezing due to inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. Emphysema is a chronic disorder in which alveolar walls are damaged, due to which respiratory surface is decreased. One of the major causes of this is cigarette smoking. Occupational respiratory disorder. In the certain industries, especially those involving grinding or stone breaking, so much dust is produced that the defense mechanism of the body cannot fully cope with the situation. Long exposure can give rise to inflammation, leading to fibrosis, proliferation of fibrous tissue, and thus causing serious lung damage. Workers in such industries should wear protective mask. So that's it. Thank you so much.